Hang on. It's like when I have the YouTube page on or like open, it's like all white. It just like blares this light at me. It's like it burns. Anyway, let me just put this on social media and then we'll start it. If you want to get connected on it, you just contact me on my Discord that I have linked. Putting the link below. I'm just eating something before I started and it's like I'm gonna get it out of my mouth here. Those annoying moments when like it gets stuck in your teeth, you know what I mean? Okay, once I turn this part off though, it'll like not be so bright. You know what I mean? I look like I'm glowing, you know? Let's get that out of here. Okay, see, that's a little better, right? I mean, I still look like I'm glowing, mainly because I think I have too many lights on. Let me just adjust that. And of course, the other problem too is that like what I see on my OBS preview is not like a 1-to-1 ratio of what you see. So that's just too much. That's too much blue, right? I think this is better. There you go. See, now this looks better, right? This looks way better. Someone was on Zoom earlier today, and so they put their stuff over all my stuff, and I gotta go dig it up. Of course, most of my notes are like right here on my computer, so. The real way to do Bible studies nowadays. You just have like your computer in front of you to like carry all your notes. I mean, yeah, don't have to use like thousands of pages of paper, right? Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but you get what I mean, right? Although if you think about it, computers are way more like it's way more expensive, but depending on how much mileage you get out of it, right? As opposed to like the ancient ways of like physical copies. Okay. Just give it a couple more minutes and then we'll start. It's been a long day. Mainly because I woke up early today, more than like, oh, I did a lot today, because that's not true. Fridays is like my day off, right? It's one of my days off. The other one being like Thursday, so. And Wednesday. Most of the time. You kind of have to think of like my week starts from like, my work week starts from like Saturday to like Wednesday or Tuesday, right? Because, if Wednesday's like the Friday, you can get what we call a fortnight, is when every other week you get that day off. Because technically, the idea is you work 9 days in 14, 9 out of 14 days. In what I do, so 1 week is 4, 1 week is 5. That's kind of how it works, right? Let's post one last thing here. All right. It's 3:05, 3:06 now. So we're going to get started. Hello and welcome to the Streaming Parson Reads the Book of Exodus. And today, I'll try not to spend so much time like actually dissecting each law like I did last week. But that's because like last week I redid the 10 Commandments and you know, when I look back 2 weeks ago, I was like, yeah, the chapter 20 should have been its own stream. Like, I don't know what I was thinking, but hindsight's 2020, right? But we'll just go through more of the laws. I won't actually really talk about thing. What? I don't know what the heck that was, but like OBS is just brain farting on me. I just gotta check something here. Why? Don't do this to me. 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 Don't you dare. Okay. I think it's okay. It freaked me out a bit because OBS was all like reconnecting, and I'm like, what do you mean reconnecting, right? Is it gonna start a new video? Do I have to post all the new links or anything like that? But it looks like it's fine. So freak out over. But anyway, as I was saying, one of the things that I kind of ran into a problem with when I was watching the playback was that like I hinted at a lot of stuff and I didn't explain it very well because I think the bigger problem is that it requires a lot more than what I can tell you, right? Without like literally taking each chapter, or even each verse, and then explaining a lot of context and a lot of mythology from not just like other parts of the Bible, but Near East mythology that would have been known to the Israelites, and as well as like evolution of Judeo thought. And an example of this was like in chapter 22 when I talked about like there were like three passages that have to involve sex, and the I didn't explain the mythology part of it very well, and so I felt like I kind of did a disservice to it because I didn't explain it all that. I didn't go into a lot of detail, right? Because it's one of those things, and maybe this is also partly my thinking, but if I'm gonna explain something, I want to explain it like thoroughly, right? Which I'm sure is you guys are used to that by now. I've done a fair amount of this in Genesis, but with some of the stuff in Exodus, which is a lot more nuanced than like Genesis, pretty straightforward, right? When you understand the mythology, but with Exodus, there's a lot of other nuances, and I didn't touch on that when I was explaining it, and I didn't give a lot of details, and so I'll try to like that's why like as we go through some of the laws today, I won't do that. I'll avoid doing that. I'll just kind of say, okay, this is what a lot of people think it means, but it doesn't mean this, simply because people misunderstood something else. That's kind of what the format I'll do, as opposed to really explain like, oh well, this actually refers to this and this and that because of this and that, right? I wouldn't have the time to do that, or else like if I were to reach chapter 23, I would only reach chapter 23 for 3 hours, and we don't want to be here all day. We don't want to go through Exodus and spend like the whole year doing it, right? So that's kind of the approach I'm going to change a little bit for today. I mean, if you have other questions and certain things are not clear, I'll do my best to explain them. But for the most part, as I explain certain things, I won't go in as much detail of the context as I did like other times, because if you're gonna do that with the laws, you're gonna be here all day, right? And I mean, to be fair, you think of like if you look back on like 200-300 BC and like a lot of the evolution of Jewish thought then, you would definitely see like how much a lot of Jewish scholars and the rabbis back then really hashed out a lot of stuff that was going on here, and this later became known as the Talmud and the Mishnah when they were later completely written down. Like what was it, like 380 or something like that? Might be even later. I don't remember exactly, but basically around 300 BC was roughly the time the Talmud and the Mishnah became a thing, but they weren't like published, if you will. It was more like there were snippets here and there, like people had pamphlets, if you will, but then like most of it was memorized. Most of it was just more like treated like common knowledge. And this is where like one of the other weird things to kind of think about is how like people ingrained understanding like an example of this is like, okay, even if you don't read your Bible every day, you should be more than well familiar with what goes on in the Bible. You should know like all the general stories and in order, right? And understand the mythology of the Bible. It's something that like everybody in North America and Europe should know because of how much it influences Western literature. And so, if we were to be like really well learned, we would just have most of the Bible, like at least the stories all memorized, right? And you'd be able to recite to someone who like all these characters in these different stories. You'd be able to recite at the very, you don't have to recite verse for verse, but you'd be able to like, oh, I could tell you exactly how the King David story goes down from like, shortly after Israel has its first king, Saul, screws up majorly, and then like God decides to pick a new guy named David, and so the prophet Samuel goes to, Bethlehem and meets Jesse, David's father. You should be able to recite this, right? And if you're able to do that, you would be able to understand so much of Western literature. And so, in the same way, right, when you read through a lot of these old texts, one of the big, how do I put it, obstacles for us as modern readers to understand a lot of what's going on in the Bible, especially in the laws, is because the Israelites would have known a lot of what was going on in the ancient world. Egypt was a big influence, obviously, when you've been living there for a couple hundred years as slaves. And then, of course, all the Canaanites, because you were going to move into their land. So you better know what these guys know, right? And so, because that doesn't exist for us today without extensive study, I'll try to avoid doing that. Anyways, that was a pretty long preface, and I kind of realized I did my preface before I started off with a word of prayer. So I'm going to pray, and then I'm just going to I'm going to dive into the word. We're just going to start reading it from chapter 23. If you want to follow along, I am using the New International Version, or NIV. Just whip it, like, if you're on your desktop, just go BibleGateway.com, Bible app. Free online Bibles, why not use them, right? So anyways, if you want to follow, I'm using the New International Version, and we'll be starting with Exodus 23. Lord God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this time that we have to read into your word. And I pray that as we read into your word and read more about your law and how you wanted to direct Israel to conduct themselves, I pray that, this would be something that would not just be cool to know about the ancient Israel, but also something that we can understand about the world today and how we can apply it in our lives and better live, not just for you, but for each other as well. I pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Alrighty, so here we go. Exodus 23. Do not spread false reports. Do not help a guilty person by being a malicious witness. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd. And do not show favoritism to a poor person in a lawsuit. If you come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to return it. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you fallen down under its load, do not leave it there. Be sure you help them with it. Do not deny justice to your poor people in their lawsuits. Have nothing to do with a false charge, and do not put an innocent or honest person to death, for I will not acquit the guilty. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds those who see and twist the words of the innocent. Do not oppress a foreigner, for you yourselves know how it feels to be foreigners, because you were foreigners in Egypt. Sorry, this thing just like popped up and was like, what's going on here? Anyways, verse 10. For 6 years you are to sow your fields and harvest the crops. But during the 7th, let the land lie unplowed and unused. Then the poor among your people may get food from them, and the wild animals may eat whatever is left. Do the same with your vineyards and your olive groves. For 6 days do your work, but on the seventh day do not work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and so that the slave born in your house and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed. Be careful to do everything I have said to you. Do not invoke the name of other gods, and do not let them be heard on your lips. So 3 times a year you are to celebrate a feast for me. Celebrate the feast of unleavened bread. For 7 days eat bread made without yeast, as I have commanded you. Do this at the appointed time in the month of Aviv, for in that month you came out of Egypt. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. Celebrate the festival of harvest with the first fruits of the crops you sow in your fields. Celebrate the festival of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in your crops from the field. 3 times a year all the men are to appear before the sovereign Lord. Do not offer the blood of a sacrifice to me along with anything containing yeast. The fat of my festival offerings must not be kept until morning. Bring the best of your first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. Now see, I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you to the place I have prepared. Pay attention to him and listen to what he says. Do not rebel against him. He will not forgive your rebellion, since my name is in him. If you listen carefully to what he says and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies and will oppose those who oppose you. My angel will go ahead of you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will wipe them out. Do not bow down before their gods or worship them or follow their practices. You must demolish them and break their sacred stones to pieces. Worship the Lord your God, and his blessing will be on your food and water. I will take away sickness from among you, and none will miscarry or be barren in your land. I will give you a full lifespan. I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. I will make all your enemies turn their backs and run. I will send the hornet ahead of you to drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, the Hittites out of your way. But I will not drive them out in a single year, because the land would become desolate, and the wild animals too numerous for you. Little by little I will drive them out before you, until you have increased enough to take possession of the land. I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, and from the desert to the Euphrates. I will give into your hands the people who live in the land, and you will drive them out before you. Do not make a covenant with them or with their gods. Do not let them live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me, because the worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you. And that's chapter 23. So chapter 23 just has some laws. Pretty straightforward, Don't pervert justice. Don't lie in court. Don't lie, period. Don't show favoritism in court, which is an interesting one to talk about. I mean, with the way the world is today, and the reason why there's so much injustice is because, honestly, when we threw out the idea of maybe the Bible's onto something, right? And People didn't hold the Bible to be binding. You know, the first thing people did was pervert justice, right? And letting the guilty get away with, you know, their evil acts. And sure, some of it is now coming to surface, but you know, we could have done a lot better in preventing it altogether if we had been a lot more honest and, you know, held these kind of high standards of not perverting justice, right? We could have done something to shut down a lot of corruption that we have seen. But I mean, hindsight's 2020, right? There's some other laws about the Sabbath. Once again, it's this idea of like no one ought to live as like a slave with no freedoms, right? And the idea is that like you don't live, you know, to the whims of a slave master. And more importantly, the Israelites were to live in a way that they were not slave drivers of other people. Because of course, you know, the way that God is, you know, telling the Israelites to live their lives, it would be easy to, once you became someone in power, it's easy to become a tyrant, right? And of course, God is trying to remind them that, hey, you know, you better not become tyrants, because remember what happened in Egypt, right? It was pretty awful. They were tyrannical to you, and it sucked. So you better not become that way now that I'm giving you a position of power. And that's an important thing that a lot of people tend to forget, right? And, you know, hot take of the week, if you will, at least one hot take of the week, is that unfortunately, you know, most of us, without a fear of God, right? Without the fear of God, you know, this is something that's so easily forgotten, right? This idea of like, when you move up into positions of power, you better not be a tyrant. And we see with like a lot of social change and socio changes, if you will, in like, you know, America is undergoing a socio revolution right now. And so, but at the same time, we're already seeing that this is going pretty badly because those who have moved up in power, right, are now being tyrannical to the people they usurped, right? And so it's not good. It's not good. But at the same time, like, yeah, on the one hand, you know, those same oppressors, you know, they were pretty bad. Yeah, that's true. But that doesn't mean that once you get, you know, more authority and more power where you are, you don't get to be tyrannical to them now, right? As like a payback, right? Which is kind of what we see. And it's not good. And this is the reason why societies fall, right? And this is not exclusive to like America. I know I sound really like, now I'm super negative. Now I'm saying that America is going under this kind of thing, but I mean it is. If anyone says otherwise, I don't. They're either in denial or they're a tyrant, right? Who's justifying their own tyranny. But um, one of the things that is really harmful to a society is when, you know, people forget their humble origins, right? That, oh, you know, it was pretty rough when we were the, you know, the minority. So maybe when we move up, maybe we shouldn't be tyrants like the previous people. But of course, the other problem is, of course, human nature tends to want to be tyrannical, right? I mean, I remember I was watching some online like seminars and talk about how like, ironically, a lot of people in the feminist movement support ideas that are actually very tyrannical, right? And a lot of people may wonder, well, what the heck, right? Like, I thought feminism was about the liberty of women. How could it allow all these other things that are actually very tyrannical towards women? But the idea is that like once you usurp the older power, right, the white man patriarchy as an example, once you usurp that and then there's nothing there to kind of show dominance, and then, well, when you have a agenda like feminism that has no real direction, then what would naturally, you know, I believe the old saying goes, nature abhors a vacuum. And so now you have this vacuum in the power dynamic, and then what do you expect will happen? A different tyrant will just step in, take power by force, and then you're back to the status quo, right? But I mean, that's kind of human nature in a nutshell, and that's all the more reason why, you know, when God was saying that, like, no, God is ultimately our leader and ultimately our king in later books in the Bible, kind of gives this point of trying to claim that, well, God is king. It was to make people see each other far more as equal. And that was the real reason of like why, you know, a lot of people may think that a theocracy would be bad, right? Or this idea that God um, is our king and our primary governing body. But of course, the real reason for that is that once you put something in that position of highest power, if you will, then when you have all of us humans, right, and none of us can take that because God is in that position, then human beings would be forced to see all other human beings as equal, and therefore, um, it would it would force us to be kinder to each other, right? It's kind of weird to think of it that way, but like, what see the to see the inverse and to see the opposite being true, when human beings hold authority over other human beings, right? You're naturally going to have, some kind of bitterness of the losers, right? The people that are lower down will always feel like, well, that's not fair, right? Why can't I be the one who's more powerful? What makes you so damn special, right? And I mean, that's a completely legitimate question, right? But in when the Bible talks about how, like, no, you only worship God, you only put God in that position, of the highest authority, if you will, then all human beings will be obligated to view each other as equals. And then, therefore, if everybody actually has a proper attitude of looking at each other as equals, then that reduces the power of tyrannical mindsets. Because let's say, somebody wants to, tell someone else what to do, right? Then we can easily see that person as being guilty before God and actually charge him of very serious crimes of like degrading human dignity as a crime, right? You don't really think of that. That sounds kind of ridiculous, right? To view like, oh, me mistreating a person's dignity as a crime. But of course, in the world today, that's not really the way it is, right? Because then everybody would be guilty because everybody wants to. In a world where human beings are not equal, like in the real world, there's always going to be somebody shutting down someone else's dignity, right? Because people want to feel better about themselves. They want to view themselves above someone else, right? As opposed to what would happen if all of us had God as our, authority figure, right? And then that would force us to view each other more as equals. And so that's a lot of these like law and mercy kind of commands that God gives Moses here in chapter 23, right? Because it's like, don't favor. There's one passage in the beginning of chapter 23 where it's like, okay, don't favor a poor person in court over the rich guy, right? But at the same time, you don't cheat the poor of their justice. And some people think, well, that's contradictory. But what God is really getting at here is that there's no one gets to like be a tyrant, right? And you look at the context of like, okay, in the case of the poor person is this mob mentality, right? And so you don't feel like, how do I put this? Oh, you're picking on somebody, right? A person, a minority. You're picking on them, the rich minority. And I mentioned this back in chapter 21 when it was about like the slaves and um, property management. And I talked about last week where like what those passages actually refer to is the reality of the 1% and the 99% that, people today love to go on and on about. But of course, the ancient world acknowledges like, yeah, that's always going to be a thing. And you can't change. And as long as human beings are human beings, you can't change that. But with that being said, because the 1% is really the minority, and the rest of us are all part of the 99%. I mean, I guess that depends on perspective. If you live in America, you're all technically part of the 1%. But with that being said, let's say within your own country, most of us would be in the in the context of North America. Me as a Canadian, I am part of the 99%, right? I'm not part of the 1%. But because we're the 99%, it's easy for us to pick on the 1%, the super rich. Oh, why it's not fair that you have all this money. Why don't you, you know, why don't we tell you what to do, right? There's more of us, democracy wins by logic, right? The 99 of us can tell you what to do because you're one guy who, if you try and say otherwise, we will just force you because there's more of us and mob power will rule over. But what the Bible's saying is that that's not just, right? Because once again, the Bible's internal logic kind of suggests that like, well, the very nature of evil is you going around telling people what to do, right? And so if a 99 poor guys go tell the one rich guy what to do, that is not right, right? And so, or 99 regular people, it doesn't have to be poor, because once again, poor is in perspective, right? When you think of, especially if you live in America, that's really more of a word of perspective. Um, Unless you're like, literally a person who's homeless, but then you're also part of the 1% of most people who aren't working and finding a way to survive, as hard as it might be, right? And then once again, you get this different kind of 99 and 1% thing too, right? But this is all the more reason to not really think of it as like an us and them, right? And the Bible is very adamant about this. It's like, no, justice is justice. We speak what's true, end of discussion, right? You don't favor a poor person in a crowd mentality against the 1% rich, and you don't favor the rich when they give bribes, right? Because that's an easy temptation for the rich to do and abuse that power. You don't pervert justice. End of story. And so the Bible is very adamant about justice in that way, is that what is what is, and you do not try and change what is, because then you would be, false testimony, and that is, God will not acquit the guilty. And that's a scary thought, right? Like that when God says, I will not acquit the guilty, right? That people would pervert truth. And this goes back to, in the Ten Commandments and why lying is on the list, right? And I made the whole joke about like, there's a lot of things we shouldn't say, right? But there's one thing we can't say, and that's lying. And the idea was because it's antithetical to the nature of God, who is truth, and God desires truth in all of us. And so, of course, there are some cases where sometimes you don't just blurt out the truth all the time because you also want to be kind. But I would rather, we would rather have that than just people speaking sweet nothings into each other's ears, right? And trying to build relationships and society on lies, because that obviously isn't going to get you very far. Then we have this last part that well, actually, before we talk about the second half of chapter 23, there's a little fun thing in here that people like to make jokes about because of the way that it had been interpreted throughout history. And this is a verse in verse 19, the second half of it. There's this funny little, it's just kind of there. And this is one of those passages that has no real context. It's just kind of like, okay. It's an interesting statement, but the way that people have interpreted it is kind of funny. and it's do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. So this is one of the funniest commands because the way it's been applied is kind of hilarious. And if you understand, like, not just Jewish people do this, right? Like a lot of Middle Eastern Arabs do this, right? The entire Arab world. So basically, all the Muslim countries do it too. Which once again, baffles the mind. Why must the Middle East go to war? You're more similar than you are different. Like, leave it alone, right? Like, of course, probably somebody's now going to shoot me for that, right? If I'm dead by next stream, now you know why. But you know, in the Middle East, they don't actually they do something that is called, either in the Jewish world they call it kosher, in the Muslim world they call it halal. Sure, the way you prep things is slightly different, but in the grand scheme of things, they're more or less the same. Like, once again, you should care more. Like, we just read these other laws about, like, human beings should view each other as equal despite our economic differences. And then now we talk about, like, food things, and just because you prepare your food differently, but you eat the same things and for the same reasons, so you're more similar than you're different, right? But that's kind of like a that's nitpicking at this point, right? I mean, you go to, like, donair places, right? And the difference between, like, halal, if you know what that is. So halal, it's a type of Mediterranean, Middle Eastern food that you don't eat certain things together, and certain things are prepared in a certain way. So, for example, all the beef in halal, there's no such thing as, like, rare. You don't get rare halal, right? Because in the Muslim world, you don't eat an animal that still has blood, right? That's a very Muslim thing. You don't eat things that have blood in it. They're not like us North Americans with our rare steak. Oh, rare steak. Thinking about it now, I'm really hungry. But, like, in halal, all your steak is well done, right? Steak or your beef, right? And it's not like us in North America. A lot of us, like, I don't know. Well, okay, maybe not a lot of us. Some of us like to eat our steak a little bit more rare, right? A little bit of red in it, right? And a little more tender. It's got that nice juicy feeling to it. You know what I mean, right? Like, but not in the Middle East. Not allowed. Not allowed. Right? You wouldn't eat you wouldn't have beef rare there. And if you ask for a rare steak, you'd be shot. Like, what kind of heresy is this? Is what a Muslim would think, right? And Jews not that different, right? You would not order a rare steak in Israel, unless you have a death wish, right? Well, maybe in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is kind of like, they do whatever they don't follow kosher rules. Tel Aviv doesn't give a damn. But I mean, that's the reason why people love Tel Aviv, because it's like the place of freedom, right? People can do whatever they want there. I mean, I'll tell you a funny story about Tel Aviv. I was in Tel Aviv, and I was part of, like, some Bible tour group, because Israel pilgrimage. Lots of Christians go there. Check out the Holy Land, all that. Lots of Muslims go there too, for obvious reasons. But anyway, Tel Aviv, though, is kind of the exception to the rule, right? And so, as a North American, and one of my buddies, really Chinese, right? He's, like, really Chinese, and we went to Israel, whatever, right? And you spend a day or two in Jerusalem, and you go to, like, Galilee and other places, and you know what you'll never find out there? You'll never find, like, pork, right? You're never gonna have your chassi or whatever, right? The thing that Chinese people love, right? Your barbecue pork. Well, you're obviously not gonna find that. First of all, you're not gonna find it barbecued. Second, you're not gonna find pork, right? So you go to Tel Aviv, and in Tel Aviv, though, they have Chinese restaurants in Tel Aviv, and you can get your barbecue pork there. I mean, my friend was just like, oh yeah, I gotta have this, right? Because here I am, and, like, I'm like, oh cool, I'm gonna have, like, some kosher, a little bit of halal, right? Because Jewish people do halal too. And the funny thing is that, like, once again, kosher and halal, they're not that different. But if you were to talk to, like, a Jew or a Muslim, they would say, "Oh, they're totally different." It's like, no, they're not really, right? Like, they're not different enough for it to matter, right? But anyway, in Tel Aviv, my friend was just like, "Oh, I gotta have like some barbecue pork. I haven't had this in like a week." I'm like, dude, man, like we're in the Middle East. In most places, we'd be shot for asking for this, right? But just one of those funny things about how they think very differently. And what's this got to do with this pass about cooking a young goat in its mother's milk? And this led to a hilarious tradition when I was in the Middle East. I didn't know this when I first went because I'm stupid. One, and two, I didn't read my Bible as much as I should have, which goes back to reason number one, because I'm stupid. And then reason number three would be like, I didn't really know this. And you don't really pay attention because, once again, if you live in Canada and you eat what a Chinese guy in Canada, we eat basically anything. I eat basically anything. And so there was something that I didn't understand at first until, like, oh yeah, of course, like kosher laws or whatever, right? In the morning, maybe for some of you in America and Canada, you might like to have your sausage and egg in the morning, or bacon and egg, or whatever, right? Well, in Israel, when I was in Jerusalem, you can have that. You can't have bacon. Well, first of all, bacon's pig, right? So, but you can't have eggs in the morning, right? You can't have. Well, no, I guess egg white would be okay. They actually have they serve egg white, just the egg white, and of course the yolk is kind of like a meat byproduct, so it's a little different. But like, for example, you couldn't have like beef in the morning, right? Because I mean, depends on who you are. Some people actually eat beef in the morning. Sometimes I eat a leftover steak I have in the fridge, heat it, put it on this fry pan, heat it up for breakfast. It's actually kind of nice. But you couldn't do that in the Middle East, and the reason is because they serve you coffee. And if they serve you coffee, you're allowed, milk or cream, right? And so they wouldn't serve you meat at the same time that you could have cream. Or sorry about that. Some kind of rando caller, one of those automated voices that are very impersonal, and they think they're telling you something useful, but it is either a scam or someone clearly not important. But anyway, back to the Tel Aviv story. Well, now I've moved from Tel Aviv. We're talking about Jerusalem now. And, I was in this hotel, and morning, you cannot have meat in the morning. And so, but that's because you're allowed to have coffee. And if you have coffee, you can have cream. But you see, the reason for this is because you cannot have cream, you cannot have dairy and meat at the same time, apparently, in places like Israel, and I'm pretty sure true in most of the Muslim countries, for this exact reason, right? This is idea that you don't cook a young goat in its mother's milk, and so many people have interpreted this to mean that meat and milk you cannot eat them together. Which, of course, if you live in North America, this is probably the most foreign idea to you, because, of course, like, what is one of the number one foods in, like, definitely in the United States, right? True in most of Canada as well, because, I mean, we're close enough, so whatever, right? We have mostly American culture. Is the cheeseburger, right? No cheeseburger allowed, right? You wouldn't be able to find a cheeseburger in Israel because you can't have meat and milk together. And so this is the differences of like halal versus like kosher is like what sauces are allowed to go in your doner. Really, that's the real difference, honestly. But like, once again, like most of those sauces are not that different from each other, right? Like hummus versus like what do Israelites eat instead of hummus? But if you think about it, it's like a tzatziki sauce, and it's not that different. But I mean, once again, this is me being a North American that eats basically anything. So I'll eat a doner with hummus, or I'll eat one with tzatziki, and I'll enjoy them both the same, right? Everything else in it is exactly the same. You're gonna put the same like vegetables in it. You're gonna put the same like, beef or lamb in it. because lamb donair is awesome. But like, you can eat that the same, right? Or you go falafel, the same, right? The only thing that's different is the sauce, and it's not even that different. You wouldn't be able to tell unless you're like a real, hummus connoisseur. You're not gonna know the difference. And I mean, once again, Jews will turn the other way. They're like, oh, cool, we can have like hummus instead of the tzatziki sauce. Like, nobody cares all that much. It's not milk, right? So it's just one of those funny things about how different cultures eat food. But in North America, we don't think about these kind of things, right? Because we don't live by this law, obviously, of goat and its mother's milk thing, right? And many people have wondered why this law was even there, right? What does this got to do with anything? Well, the simple answer would be like it might be a sanitary thing. Um, Nobody's really sure. Similar to like why Jews don't eat pork in the ancient world. Of course, nowadays they still maintain that tradition, like they don't eat pork, which you'd be hard pressed to find bacon in Israel. Um, all I can think of is that one joke in The Simpsons where Homer Simpson he makes a phone call and he wants to buy some food. He wants to do it, and he goes, "I like a pork falafel with extra cheese." And then phone person, "Yes, I know what a falafel is." Because Homer Simpson, he's an idiot, right? But you know, you wouldn't find pork in Israel because they don't eat pork. But of course, when it comes to certain dietary things, I think a lot of it, and most Bible scholars agree on this idea, is that like most of it might have been more sanitary issues than anything. Because I mean, honestly, Chinese people figured this crap out long ago, right? Of how to eat pork properly, and I mean, we eat it all the dang time, right? Because we're disgusting like that. Um, Pretty sure uh, an Arab or a Jew would view us Chinese people as like some of the most disgusting human being on the planet because we eat all this stuff that they're told not to eat. But we're like NBD, and of course, there's the whole thing in like the Book of Acts, and there was a whole controversy about that, right? Do modern Christians have to live exactly like with the old laws? And the dietary ones were a big one, right? Of course, in um, Acts 15, they were like, "Nah, we've decided that that's not necessary." Um, Only four primordial rules that every Christian should follow. Avoid sexual immorality. Uh, don't eat food sacrificed to idols. And even that one has like nuances because Paul will later say like, "Wow, in the grand scheme of things, like we don't really like we know idols aren't really anything, so you know it doesn't really matter. And besides, you don't want to waste food because that would be more disrespectful." Um, Not just to people, but to God to waste food because we're supposed to be good stewards of the land, and stuff like that, right? But the Israelites, and even to this day, an Orthodox Jew and a Muslim will hold up some of these dietary rules, and one of them is you don't have meat and dairy at the same time. With that being said, going back to my Michael in Jerusalem stories, I got a lot of them. But that's also why you don't have coffee at night, which is funny because um, I live in a part of Vancouver, really close to this area that we call it the Drive. Now I've kind of given away my address as well, but like um, the Drive is this area that used to be called Little Italy, and so there's a lot of Italian restaurants and not just Italian restaurants, but Italian dessert places. And Italians are known to love their nighttime coffee and ice cream and nighttime, you know, dairy. After you eat some pizza or you go to a fancier Italian restaurant and have like real Italian food, right? What do you do after? You go for nighttime coffee and ice cream. But in the Middle East, that's a no-no, right? You can't have dairy and meat at the same time, right? And so if you're in Israel, you wouldn't have coffee during your dinner. Because some people do that, Italians being one of them. Funny thing, and I love hanging out with like, it's funny because they're not my in-laws exactly. They're my cousin's in-laws. But I love hanging out with them because like we get to do cool Italian stuff, and eat good Italian food with them, and it's great. I have a cousin who married an Italian guy. Dur. Um, but I would love hanging out with them, and nighttime coffee is just something that they do, right? It's just part of what you do as Italian uh, eating out, right? And it. I don't know. I like it, and their coffee's good. That's another thing. Like I actually like coffee a fair amount. I probably drink too much coffee, honestly, if you think about it. But I should probably drink less of it now that I'm getting older. But that would not be allowed in somewhere like Jerusalem. You wouldn't have your coffee at night because at nighttime you're allowed your beef and whatever, right? Or your fish or whatever. It's kind of they don't. I don't know if they have nuances when it comes to fish and coffee, but apparently they don't serve coffee at dinner anyway. So if I was in an Italian restaurant, I could have coffee with my dinner. But if I'm in a Jewish restaurant, you can't have coffee with dinner. As a matter of fact, you'll find if you go to like a doner place that's like Syrian or something, right? You'll notice that they don't serve coffee, right? And it's for that exact reason, right? Because you might want cream in it, but you're not. But if they're like either Muslim or Orthodox Jewish, I mean, talk about a Syrian restaurant, you won't find Jewish, but you get the point. If they're more Muslim, right? In this like Syrian doner place, you won't find that they offer coffee, and it makes sense. Violate this idea of don't cook a goat in his mother's mouth. I know I'm going a lot about this, but I always found this passage to actually be kind of hilarious because it's one of those things in North America you don't think about, right? I mean, if you live in North America and if you're not eating a cheeseburger, are you really North American? Of course, now I've just insulted every vegetarian, but like, and further down the scale of not eating meat people. But you get the point, right? Most of us love our cheeseburger. Whether it's a simple one or you like a little extra in it, a bacon cheeseburger. Now we're talking, right? Of course, that's like the most disgusting thing to a Jew or a Muslim. But like, a lot of us North Americans, you might as well just say American. I'm not American, but I'll throw myself in the lot. I hang around a lot of Americans. So, that's enough, right? My ex-girlfriend is American, and we did a lot of American stuff. So, those kind of things, right? We're a bit American. But, cheeseburgers, right? You gotta love cheeseburger. But you can't have that. I don't know if I could live my life without cheeseburger. Right? It'd be pretty hard. I'm sure I could. It'd be really hard, though. But, apparently, there's this law in the Bible that says, don't cook a goat in its mother's milk, and many people interpret it that you don't eat cheese and milk, or sorry, cheese and meat at the same time. Cheese and milk, cheese and meat at the same time. It's just one of those funny laws because like the way people apply it today. And this is one of the other funny things about like reading the Bible as an ancient text, right? Because you read something like this and you'll be like, well, how the hell do we apply this, right? And so you get some more like, we look at the law commands and they're like, okay, we have very strict ways of applying this law and how we conduct ourselves in a society. And then you have these other laws that are more obscure, like don't cook a goat in its mother's milk. And then you have these hilarious kind of like traditions that we built out of them, right? But, some laws we don't follow anymore. And now some people may think, well, can you be a real Christian then if you don't follow every single law? Well, one, the law was kind of established that to poke fun at human beings. And that's one of the funny things about the Bible too, right? Where now you have to think of it like this. The Bible is all about what God can do. So obviously, if God is the real hero, then human beings aren't really viewed as anything special. And part of that means that the human beings, since we're not special, we're not divine in that sense. We cannot uphold these laws, not all of them, because that would just be ludicrous. And the Bible kind of makes itself ludicrous for that reason. But I've always liked this don't cook a goat in its mother's milk law. It's always funny. And it will come up again. They bring it up again. along with other dietary laws. But anyway, I talked a lot about that one passage. The second half of chapter 23 is an interesting part. It talks about how God has this angel. He says, I'm sending an angel ahead of you, and he's gonna prepare the way. He's gonna go to the other nations and whatever, and prepare the way. He will strike fear into them if they, if they try to challenge you, Israel. This angel will strike fear into them, and he will also, pave a way for you to move into this land. If anyone resists, then they won't be able to, because this angel will kind of, give you the victory, right? Kind of that's the general gist of it, right? And the interesting about this angel, once again, the Bible does this weird thing where, like, clearly this being is not just an angel as we understand, like, angels as God's employees, but rather this angel, or the angel of the Lord, as many people have dubbed it, is like, this angel is actually like the second person in the Trinity, or the Son as we dub him. And of course we know the Son to be Jesus Christ. And so, how do we know this with this angel figure? Well, there's one passage of it that's pretty telling. And it goes, I'm going to go find it. It's in here. I know it is. Oh yeah, it's pretty early. That's why I missed it. I thought it'd be like later down. So this is in verse 21. And it says, pay attention to him and listen to what he says. Do not rebel against him, and he will not forgive your rebellion, since my name is in him. That's interesting, that this angel has the ability, one, to forgive. Well, really, that's the thing that makes him stand out, is that he can forgive. Because later, in Jewish thought, people knew that only God could actually forgive. And, there's an old Chinese proverb, to err is human, to forgive divine. And, it does make sense in the Christian context, because without the forgiving power of Jesus Christ, we can't forgive. And, of course, to err, though in Chinese proverb it's very general, in Christian theology, we would just put sin in there, right? To sin is human, right? And to forgive is Christly, right? That's the Christian way of interpreting that sentence. But that's the idea, right? Is that only God can forgive, is what I'm trying to get at here. And so, of course, there's this story in the book of Mark and the book of Matthew. I think all the synoptics have it. The book of Luke has it. It's the one where, the quadriplegic is lowered into this house that Jesus is chilling at, right? And then Jesus says to this quadriplegic, like, your sins are forgiven. And the Pharisees in the audience are like, yo, what the crap, right? Like, who's this guy think he is, right? He's blaspheming. Only God can forgive. And then, of course, Jesus says, well, what's easier to say to someone? Your sins are forgiven, or get up and walk, which is meant to be rhetorical, because both are ridiculous to say to a quadriplegic. Both are ridiculous. And then, but then, of course, Jesus then says, but so you know that the Son of Man has authority and all that, I say to you, get up and walk. And then, of course, the quadriplegic gets up and he goes home. But in Jewish thought, they understood that only God could forgive. And so, going here in Exodus 23, and this passage is pretty interesting, where this angel has this ability to forgive, or even deny it, apparently, as the passage actually says. He has the power to deny it. But, it goes with that weird logic that I used earlier when I talked about how, like, since God is life, he is also, like, the God of death, because of if he is the giver of life, he has the power to take it. In the same way here, this angel, which once again is where most Bible scholars say, well, actually we're referring to the second person in the Trinity, the Son. He has the power not just to forgive, but he has the power to withhold it, because he is the essence of forgiveness, right? The Son is the power of forgiveness, right? Any form of forgiveness comes from the Son. And so this angel apparently has the power to withhold forgiveness. So the Bible, the Old Testament, kind of poking fun at the darker aspects of God, if you want to call it that. Because once again, the transient of logic is if the Son has the power to forgive, he has the power to withhold forgiveness. And the Bible is consistent with this, right? There's the whole, like, when Peter asks Jesus, how many times must I forgive my brother? And Jesus tells him, well, not just 7 times, but 70 times 7. Or basically, it's more of a metaphor, right? Because the number 7 means complete. And so the idea was that in order to be even more than perfect, which sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but to be even more than perfect, right, you must always be prepared to forgive, because if you don't forgive, God won't forgive you, right? And that's basically what Jesus actually means by that, right? If you are not always prepared to forgive, then God can withhold forgiveness, which is a scary thought, mind you, right? If you're not willing to forgive, God will withhold forgiveness from you, which is a terrifying thought. But once again, when Jesus is expressing this idea, and going back to the book of Exodus, this idea that, like, yes, the Son has this power to forgive, but he can also withhold it, because that is totally within his power. He's God after all, right? So why couldn't he do this, right? But with that being said, this angel that's described here in chapter 23 apparently has this power. So clearly it's not just like an angel as we understand of, like, one of God's minions, right? But like this angel of the Lord, if you will, is in fact God himself, because he possesses a power only God could have, right? And then, of course, that continuing on in verse 21, it even says, he will not forgive your rebellion since my name is in him, right? And so to understand this weird language of, like, when God shares his name with someone else, this is interesting, right? Because, you read a lot in the Old Testament about how God's like, don't worship other idols. Don't try and say anyone is equal to me, right? Don't try and equate any of these nature gods to me, right? I have no equal, basically, is what he's saying, because, he's God and all that, right? And then he says about this angel, well, he is my equal, which is why a lot of people, when you read the Bible at face value, a lot of people go, huh? And rightly so, right? It's like, huh? Right? So God describes this angel to be his equal, right? And one is the whole name thing, and the second thing is that he has the power to forgive, or in this case, withhold it. And then, continuing on, this same angel is described as the terror of God, or my terror. I will send my terror to the land I'll send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. I'll make all your enemies turn their backs and run. And so, once again, this interesting imagery that the Bible uses of, like, the Son. And this is the important thing to remember, too. This is the Son who's described this way, right? Because, we read in Exodus 11, trying to remember which chapter it was. I talked about it in great lengths already, so I'm like, I better remember which one it is. In chapter 11, there's this whole thing where God says, well, I will go down and kill the firstborn of Egypt. And so basically God assumes onto himself, basically the Grim Reaper, right? And then here now he does the same thing with the Son. And this is an interesting thing, and something that a lot of people, once again, is something that it's unfortunate a lot of people miss out on this part of the Bible, because, to be fair, reading through this part of Exodus can be boring when you're just, like, trying to read it through, right? Honestly, if I wasn't giving my commentary, how many of you would actually read this part of the Bible, right? I don't blame you. It's not the most interesting part on face value, right? But at the same time, it's still important to read. Just because it's boring doesn't mean you shouldn't read it. But, let's be honest, it can be boring at times, but that doesn't mean you don't read parts of the Bible because they're boring. That's like saying you skip parts of a movie because every movie has boring parts, right? The Bible is no exception, right? If anything, that's what makes the Bible feel more real, right? Because like anything else, it has these same conditions. But anyway, that's more abstract and not need to be focused on. But anyway, back to this whole angel and him being this terror figure, right? So the Bible does something interesting here where, first of all, it makes this angel and it labels him as basically the Son, right? In the Trinity of God. He's the Son, right? because we know this from his power to forgive, or rather to refuse it in this case, in chapter 23's case anyway. And of course, when God says, well, he will have my name, right? He will bear my name. And then, of course, it's interesting that the Bible does this, because then the next paragraph, right? Well, at least the way your Bible divides it, at least the NIV does, in verse 27, it says, well, I will send my terror. And he's talking about the same guy, right? And this debunks this old myth that a lot of people, they talk about how, like, well, the God in the Old Testament is different from the God of the New Testament because Jesus is such a nice guy. Well, first of all, you're admitting that Jesus is God, so why, you're essentially affirming what Christianity believes, as opposed to denying it. Secondly, that's actually not true that they're different, right? Because once again, you read here that, if this is the Son that we're talking about, who later, takes the form and becomes the person, he takes on the form of man and becomes a person of Jesus Christ. I should make that as two sentences, not just one. I don't want to confuse you too much. Like I already am. Like I'm already not doing that, right? But we're talking about the same guy here. But here in Exodus, the same guy, he's the terror of God, right? He's terror itself, right? And it's an interesting thing that the Bible does here. Of course, the Bible paints this picture beautifully, right? Like, this angel, this one I will send ahead of you, right? First of all, there's all kinds of messianic stuff in it. Tons of Christian Bible scholars will talk about how, like, well, this is definitely true when Jesus, died on the cross and went ahead of us into death, overcame it, right? And then goes ahead of us now into the new life, right? That's obviously true. But, you look at Exodus and it paints this kind of picture. But because, see, now I'm going to like Christianese language. You just got to bear with me. I'm going to try and spell this out without assuming too much. Because once again, like, a lot of Christians assume this. And we know this because we've known this. But basically, one of the big deals about Jesus dying on the cross, not just the forgiveness of sins, but was to reveal, to make open the ways of the Holy of Holies and us, right? And God is the high priest that allows us access into the Holy of Holies. So the Holy of Holies is like, the centerpiece of the temple, especially in, like, ancient Judaism, and when they had the temple, right? And in the center of the temple, or more or less the center of the temple, was a special place where the high priest would make a special offering to God. And he would only do this like once a year. And this special room was called the Holy of Holies, right? And it was a very special ritual that took place there, right? And it was meant to be secret, right? A lot of it was meant to be kind of like this. Secret's not the best word for it. It was concealed, or the Christianese language, we talk about the veil, right? There was the veiling of the Holy of Holies, right? And of course, there's a passage in Matthew when Jesus died on the cross, that veil was ripped, torn in two from top to bottom, right? And there's a spiritual significance of how Jesus, he made way for us to enter the Holy of Holies, metaphorically, right? Through belief in him. Anyway, what does this have to do with Exodus 23? Well, Exodus 23 is pointing to that. But of course, if you were to read the Bible in chronological order, so basically I'm telling you the story backwards. But if you were to read this chronologically, you have to assume that God is taking a veiled form. And this is where the Grim Reaper metaphor, oddly enough, works really well, right? Because you imagine the creature of the Grim Reaper, right? He's this hooded fellow, right? He or she or whatever. I mean, the spirit of death doesn't have a real gender, right? Which, another reason why it's, some people, have there's a close association with God in this imagery, right? Because God also has no gender, just like the Grim Reaper. But anyway, of course, like the Grim Reaper, the way we understand the Grim Reaper as moderns is kind of like a secularized version of this Christian idea that God is also the taker of life. But anyway, what does this got to do with this imagery that's being painted in Exodus 23? Well, in Exodus 23, God is still, there's a veil that hides the nature of God and the nature of the Son in this case, right? It's hiding the nature of the Son. Because, this is what the book of Hebrews goes on and on about, how like, well, Jesus is the fullness and the manifestation of God, right? And he's the unveiled manifestation of God. This is Hebrews 2 and 3 in a nutshell, right? And then the Hebrews 3 continues with the whole high priest thing, right? And that as Jesus is our high priest, the Holy of Holies is unveiled to all of us, right? But if you were to read the Bible in chronological order, you see the veil first, naturally, right? But the veil is meant to be intimidating and scary to death, right? Because once again, the ceremony of the Holy of Holies was this really serious deal, right? And in the priestly order, if the high priest did not enter the Holy of Holies in the proper manner, if he didn't do all the sacrifices properly and made atonement and all that, the high priest could die in the Holy of Holies. And there was a funny thing where, like, by tradition, the high priest would actually have this rope tied to him, right? And if the high priest took too long in the Holy of Holies, you could safely assume he might have died in there. And so they would pull him out. That was kind of the idea, right? So when we read it, Exodus 23, there's this kind of play on with the temple. And of course, the role Jesus will later on bring as he, when he dies on the cross and, makes way for the Holy of Holies for us through the cleansing of sin in his blood. But before that, right? Because remember, we're reading Exodus, we're not reading Hebrews, right? We're reading Exodus. In Exodus, the mystery is meant to be terrifying. That's what the Bible's painting this imagery for. And I think it's one of those things that, like, modern Christian, because once again, when I explained it, I did jump forward in time. I cheated, if you will, right, with the explanation. But when you read through, if you were, you imagine these, Israelites walking around in the desert back then, right? They would not have known this for obvious reasons, right? Jesus didn't walk the earth yet, at least not the way we know, right? That didn't, Jesus didn't die on the cross yet. So when there was this manifestation of the forgiveness of God and the angel that carries the name of God, right? But at the same time, he is a mystery, and that is meant to be terrifying, right? And so he is addressed as the terror of God because of the implications of what happens if you approach God without, atonement, right? Which ultimately comes in the person of Christ himself, right? At least that was the way we were given, because we could not uphold God's perfection, right? Only Christ could do that. And so what would happen if we approach the Holy of Holies? It would be certain death. And that is terrifying. And that is why the angel is also addressed as the terror here, right? In the same way. And so using the Grim Reaper analogy again, he's hooded, he's got this huge black robe, right? And you don't see him, right? And it's meant to, if you saw this hooded figure, you'd be running the opposite direction because you'd be so scared, right? Assuming you didn't poop your pants, right? You'd be running for it. Heck, even if you did poo your pants, you'd be running for it. You'd just be running with the soils in it too, right? You get the point, right? You'd be deathly terrified of this guy, right? In the same way, God describes his angel in this same way, right? That the earlier part of chapter, or the earlier part of that half, the second half of chapter 23, paints them to be, right? That he, this is I am sending my son, right? But because he, because of the time now, right? He's not, well, I mean, he still is your deliverer, but not in the same way that we as modern Christians understand it. But he is also the terror, right? And where he goes, because no one can approach God, right? There is nothing but fear, right? And so it's an interesting analogy that Exodus paints, right? And I think one of the genius of the Gospel of Matthew, the way that it's written, and a lot of Bible scholars talk about how, like, well, Matthew parallels a lot of Exodus, is because Exodus was the veiled deliverance, right? God is veiled, in this kind of cloak. And so, hence giving the Grim Reaper imagery, right? Because he's veiled, he's hooded, right? He's covered. But then, of course, in the Gospel of Matthew, it's the complete opposite. God is unveiled. The manifestation of God takes visible flesh, right, and all that stuff, right? But in Exodus, we're seeing when God is veiled, and He is the mystery, and the implications of how scary that can be at times, and why your relationship with God is not meant to be taken lightly, right? Because one wrong step, you could be dead, right? If you approach the Holy of Holies, if you approach God, without that reverence, it could cost you everything, right? So I just find that chapter 23 does this interesting thing, and it addresses this angel in this way. And I think mainly because of the contrast, when you compare like Exodus and Matthew is a great example, right? The veiled angel, the veiled son versus him taking flesh and being one of us, right? There's a very, he's the same guy, but at the same time, there's a difference of our relationship dynamic, right? Here he's just, we just know him as the ultimate, right? He's the ultimate form of forgiveness. He carries the name of God. He is the terror of all terrors, right? But then in Matthew, God takes on the form of a servant, right? He takes on a much more humbler appearance, just like any, looking like an ordinary person and all that, right? And so it's an interesting contrast. And the reason why I kind of paint this darker metaphor is meant that, like, the prophetic nature and, the book of Exodus being prophecy, right? Not that different from, if you think about most of the Bible, well, let me put it this way. And I mentioned this when I did my whole Genesis study, right? At the time when, they were written, you're supposed to treat it as if it was prophecy, right? Of course, the problem we run into as moderns is this prophecy stopped being prophecy because it's been fulfilled, right? Like the prophecy of Jesus and him, unveiling the Holy of Holies, that has already been fulfilled with him, his death on the cross and resurrection. That's been fulfilled. So because we know that, the prophetic nature of Exodus 23, you don't think about it very much, because like if the prophecy is fulfilled, then you don't think of it as prophecy. You just think of like, oh, it's a neat observation, right? But no, it's actually a prophetic thing that God is doing here, right? And he's using a very literal case where, like, okay, now he's going to march into like the land of Canaan. But in the same way, Christ marches into the land of death, right, on our behalf. And this is where in Catholic doctrine, they talk a lot about, well, Christ into hell for 3 days, right, to overcome death and sin, and brought to life all that had died before as well, right? And that's a big part of Catholic doctrine, about how Christ went ahead of us into the darkness, right? But he overcame it, and therefore we can follow him and overcome darkness without fear, right? That's kind of why the Catholics word it that way. And so I just think that chapter 23 has this interesting prophetic name, which is funny that it happens like, the first half of chapter 23 was like laws on morality and how to be just. And then, of course, the second half is all about this prophecy of what Christ is going to do on a meta level, but of course, what he does for the Israelites first into the land of Canaan, right? It's just a very interesting thing to think about, and why chapter 23 is actually pretty brilliant. Chapter 24. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. You are to worship at a distance, but Moses alone is to approach the Lord." It's interesting, he talks about himself in the third person. No one else must come near, and the people may not come up with him. So when Moses told the people all the Lord's words and laws, they responded with one voice, "Everything the Lord has said we will do." Moses then wrote down everything the Lord had said. He got up the next morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood and put it in bowls, and the other half he splashed against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people, and they responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey." Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, "This is the blood of the..." Sorry, Moses' voice. "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words." So Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up and saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli, as bright blue as the sky. But God did not raise his hand against these elders of the Israelites. They saw God, they ate, and they drank. And the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I will give you tablets of stone with the law of the commandments I have written for their instruction." Then Moses set out with Joshua his aide, and Moses went up on the mountain of God. And he said to the elders, "Wait here for us until we come back to you. Aaron and Hur are with you, and anyone involved in a dispute can go to them." Then Moses went up to the mountain. The cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. So for 6 days the cloud covered the mountain, and on the 7th day the Lord called to Moses from within the cloud. To the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on top of the mountain. Then Moses entered the cloud as he went up on the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. It's hardcore, because what are you going to eat that whole time? But anyway, chapter 24, it's pretty straightforward. Just kind of narrative of like, oh, we're going to do a sacrifice before we approach God, because, you can't go to God without that blood offering, right? So they do a whole blood offering, some kind of old ritual, because that's how ancient people did things. Sure, it's pretty gross by our modern standards, but ancient people did weird things, so you just gotta roll with it. And of course, Moses goes up basically by himself up this mountain. And while he's up there, God has him kind of chill out for 40 days and 40 nights as God basically gives him all the instructions and all that, right? Of how Israel is to live, and, more than just the 10 Commandments, but now there's like explanations of them and stuff, right? But we don't see all of it, and we'll get to why that's the case. Not much else to say about chapter 24, honestly. It's just narrative stuff, nothing profound here, right? Not like chapter 22. Chapter 22 is pretty profound. Chapter 24, not so much. Just like, yeah, this is what happened, right? Moses goes up to the mountain. There is a whole, like, how the Israelites, like, all they could see of God, if that makes any sense, right? Because they can only see, like, the top of the mountain, and there's, like, this fire, I guess, right? So, like, was Mount Sinai a volcano at one point? Like, I don't know. I mean, we know there is a Mount Sinai, and people have been there. Of course, it doesn't look like a volcano at all. It's just some regular-looking mountain. And if you look at it, it's not even like a big mountain. It's just like, I mean, it's big enough, I guess. It constitutes as a mountain. But, like, I mean, at the same time, the Middle East is full of mountains, right? It's got a lot of mountains. I mean, to be fair, there's a lot of desert too, but you get the point, right? Mount Sinai is not like this one mountain in like a plain, right? There's like a whole bunch of mountains, and there would have been a bunch of mountains where Sinai was too. And so, but I don't know what this has to do with anything. It's just like, oh yeah, Moses goes up, and people are just kind of chilling out, not really doing much. But Moses alone goes up, and he spends 40 days and 40 nights. Of course, a lot of people talk about like the metaphorical like 40, and how 40 is like it's a special number in the Bible about like a time of patience. 40 is supposed to be like a representation of patience, right? I mean, if you're going to be doing something for 40 days and 40 nights, you clearly have to have patience to do that, right? Imagine doing like one large activity, or like imagine like if you were like on a camping trip, but it wasn't like a weekend thing. It was like you spent a whole month in one place in the middle of bumfrick nowhere, right? Yeah, that requires real patience and tenacity. And I'll tell you this much: I don't have that patience and tenacity. 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness sounds like hell to me. And here Moses is just like, yeah, we're gonna do this thing. And God's like, yeah, we're gonna do this thing. 40 days, 40 nights. You think you're ready for it? I'd be like, no. I mean, what do you even eat? What do you even eat while you're out there? I guess if God is there, he'll just like magically make food or something. But like, what would I do with 40 days and 40 nights in like the middle of a mountain, right? And the mountain's basically in the middle of nowhere, right? In some mountain range, right? As the Israelites walked around, right? What would you do for 40 days and 40 nights? And then of course, like not just Moses, right? But of course everybody waiting for the guy. They gotta wait 40 days and 40 nights. Like that is some hardcore tenacity. I guess, us as 21st century people do not possess such tenacity. But to be able to just like camp around in one place for 40 days and 40 nights is hardcore. I mean, I guess we kind of have to do that now with like the whole COVID thing. We're just stuck at home. I mean, we've been doing it longer than 40 days and 40 nights. We've been doing it for like almost like we've been doing it for a whole year now almost. Since the lockdown began. Wow. It's weird to think it's already been that long. Anyway. Just checking these next chapters. Chapter 25, 26. Chapter 25, 26 go together. Chapter 27. Okay, so these next set of chapters, these parts kind of explain themselves. So I'm just going to read through the next 4 chapters. Just going to speed read these. And then, chapter 29 is also part of, are you serious? Oh, wow. All these chapters is a lot. Oh, yeah. Okay, maybe we're going to split this part into 2 parts, because there's no way I'm going to read all of this in one go. Not in an hour and a half. I don't think I'm going to read 6 chapters. So, just for context, the next 6 chapters is basically God is going to give Moses very detailed instructions of the meeting place, if you will, of the religion, Judaism basically, right? How the meeting place, we'll call it the tabernacle, which literally just translates to the meeting place, or the meeting tent, if you will. But the idea is that there's a meeting place, and then of course like the priest, and how they are to conduct themselves, and the ceremonies and the rituals of sacrifice and all that. And then of course, other things for the meeting place, right? So basically the next like 5, 6 chapters are all about the meeting place. So I'm going to divide this up to 2 parts. We'll probably read 3 of them today. We'll read the rest of it next week. And then of course we'll continue next week's with a story everybody should know. But, I mean, you can read ahead. I mean, I encourage you to. And then come with questions. But, or you could just wait till next week when I read it. And then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But anyway, I just wanted to check where I was in like my bearings here. So, chapter 25. Here we go. So the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to bring me an offering." I mean, didn't we just do that? You are to receive the offering for me from everyone whose heart prompts them to give. These are offerings you are to receive from them: gold, silver, and bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet yarns, and fine linen, goat hair, ram skins, dyed red, and another type of durable leather. Uh, Acacia wood, I think that's how you say that. Acacia wood, I hate words like this. Olive oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil, and for the fragrant incense. And onyx stones and other gems are to be mounted on the ephod and breastplate. Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishing exactly like the pattern I will show you. So, first, have them make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, a cubit and a half wide, and a cubit and a half high. Overlay it with pure gold, both inside and out, and make a gold molding around it. So cast 4 gold rings for it and fasten them to its 4 feet, and with 2 rings on one side and 2 rings on the other. You could have just said 2 rings on each side. Then make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Insert the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark to carry it. The poles are to remain in the rings of this ark, and they are not to be removed. Then put in the ark the tablets of the covenant law, which I will give you. Make an atonement cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long, and a cubit and a half wide, and make 2 cherubim out of hammered gold at the ends of the cover. Now make one cherub on one end and the second cherub on the other. So once again, you can just put a cherub on each side. Make the cherubim of one piece with the cover and the 2 ends. The cherubim are to have their wings spread upward. Overshadow the cover with them. The cherubim are to face each other, looking toward the cover. Place the cover on top of the ark and put it in the ark and the tablets of the covenant law that I will give to you. There above the cover between the 2 cherubim are over the ark of the covenant law. I will meet with you and give you all my commands for the Israelites. Now make a table of acacia wood, 2 cubits long, a cubit wide, and a cubit and a half high. Overlay it with pure gold, and make a gold molding around it. Also make around it a rim a handbreadth wide, and put a gold molding on the rim. So basically it's like covered in gold. Make 4 gold rings for the table and fasten them to the 4 corners where the 4 legs are. The rings are to be close to the rim to hold the poles used in carrying the table. Now make the poles of acacia wood, overlaying them with gold, and carry the table with them. And make its plates and dishes of pure gold, as well as its pitchers, and bowls for the pouring out of offerings. Put the bread of the presence on this table to be before me at all times. Ooh, this is a long one. Now make a lampstand of pure gold. Hammer out its base and shaft, and make its flower-like cups, buds and blossoms on 1 pieces of each of them. 6 branches are to extend from the sides of the lampstand. They are on one side and 3 on the other. 3 cups shaped like almond flowers with buds and blossoms are to be on each branch. 3 on the next branch, and same for all 6 branches, extending from the lampstand. And on the lampstand there are to be 4 cups shaped like almond flowers with buds and blossoms. 1 bud shall be under the first pair of branches, extending from the lampstand. Oh, excuse me. First yawn on the stream. A 2nd bud under the 2nd pair, and a 3rd under the 3rd pair. 6 branches in all. The buds and branches shall all be of 1 piece with the lampstand, hammered out of pure gold. That's hardcore. Then make it 7 lamps and set them up so that they may light the space in front of it. Its wick trimmers and trays are to be of pure gold. A talent of pure gold is to be used for the lampstand and all these accessories. See that you make them according to the pattern shown to you on the mountain. And I just gonna whip up an image of what the ark is said to look like. I mean, the Bible goes in a lot of detail on what it looks like. So I'm just Ark of Covenant. Let's get an image. Glowing. So this is what it is said to look like. I mean, a lot of these. This is just like a lot of interpretations of what it looks like. Because, of course, the real Ark of the Covenant is lost. Even if Indiana Jones technically found it, he then stashed it away somewhere, so nobody knows where it is. Those of you who know that reference, please leave a like. But, I mean, oh, come on, you can do better than this. Okay, let me just, just want the image, my guy. Like, come on. You gotta do this to me. This is actually a really good, I just want the image. There you go. I'm just gonna close this for a second. Alright. This is what it is said to look like. So, you know, it's basically all covered in gold. You got the two cherubs. Or cherubim. There's the poles. There's the rings on each side. And then you put the acacia wood. Because remember, this thing is actually made out of wood, right? But it's just covered in gold. But then, like, okay, so the thing about the Ark of the Covenant, which, well, it'll come up later, is that, like, you have to carry it by the poles, right? Because the idea is that if you touch any of the parts that are, like, the golden parts, if you will, you die, right? You can't touch the Ark of the Covenant. Because it's, like, you know, it's so holy, right? And so you can't touch it or you die. And so there's these poles that are you're supposed to use to carry this thing, right? You have like a guy on each corner, right? So you got 4 guys, 1 on each corner to carry this thing. But you think about like this thing has got to be like hella heavy, right? Because first of all, acacia wood is not light, okay? It's not like super heavy, but it's not light either. Like it's got weight to it. And on top of that, you just covered all that wood. You covered all that wood in gold, right? I mean, this thing's got to be like super heavy, right? Like that's hardcore to carry this thing around, and you can only carry it by the poles because once again, like you can't touch the ark itself or you'll die. Of course, there are some exceptions during like once again like holy of holy high priest ritual stuff, but like yeah, like this thing is like I don't know how these guys carried it around, right? I mean, nothing short of the miracle of God to carry this thing because it's a giant block of wood covered in gold. How heavy is this thing gotta be? I wonder if I can look that up. How heavy do you think the Ark of the Covenant would be? Okay. How heavy? See, this is the kind of things I think about. How heavy was the Ark of the Covenant? I want to know. Are you serious? I gotta read this whole thing? Okay, it's not that long. So the tabernacle and the time of Moses was described in Exodus 25. Okay, we haven't read that part yet. Did I just? No, I just read it. I just read it. Yeah, what am I talking about? I just read it. So chapter 25, 10 to 22. Built on a portable temple. To be a portable temple. That's a tabernacle. And then commentators ignore the point that we've disregarded weight calculations. For example, Rashi on Exodus 26:17 assumes that the planks were 10 cubits high and 1.5 cubits wide. Or 1 cubit and blah, 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 blah. The weight of such planks would be at least 1,320 pounds. That's 600 kilograms. Which would have made it impossible to transport 48 such planks. Plus other planks of silver and silver sockets. Through the desert in 4 wagons pulled by only 2 oxen each. An alternate estimate that these planks were only about 1 centimeter thick is therefore likely correct. In the light of the fact that most commentators did not calculate the weight of the tabernacle, I was pleased to see the article by this guy, Josiah Derby, wherein it attempts to calculate the weight of the Ark of the Covenant, including the weight of the gold overlay. He calculates that the weight is about 288 pounds, and argues that it's too heavy for 4 men to carry on their shoulders. Yeah, like seriously. Like, 288 pounds? And that's just the box itself. Because we gotta remember, God told Moses to put 2 stone tablets, and then later the rod of God, the staff of God, is meant to, well, the staff can't be, the staff isn't that heavy. But like, it's got 2 stone tablets in this thing too. So this thing's at least 300 pounds. Which means, yeah, it'd be way too heavy for 4 dudes to carry on their shoulders, each having to bear a load of 75 plus pounds. I'm going to account for the weight of the tablets. This conclusion disturbs me because the ark was carried many times on the shoulders of 4 men. You see in Exodus 25, number 7, Joshua 3, 4, and 6, 1 Kings 2, and 1 Chronicles 15:15. And therefore presenting a modified okay, this guy's now coming with his different calculation for the weight of the ark based on the calculator's commentary in the book of Exodus. The calculator was performed in the scientific centimeter gram system of units as well as foot-pound units used by Derby. The weight of the ark comes out to be only 183 pounds, which 4 men could carry on their shoulders without difficulty, each bearing a load of about 46 pounds. The calculations made by Derby are the following. The density of gold is given as 197 pounds per cubic foot. The value is correct. This value is correct for pure gold. However, the gold used in ancient times must have contained a percentage of impurities, and the density would be closer to 106 pounds. So that's a fair assumption. It's not pure gold, because pure gold would be way too heavy. 2. The thickness of gold overlay is assumed to be 1/64 of an inch. Okay, I can accept this. Like, it's just like a gold painting, basically, kind of like thinness. That's 0.02 centimeters. In Exodus 38:24, the total weight of the gold for all the vessels is going to be 29 talents and 730 shekels. The weight of a talent is equivalent to 3,000 shekels. Therefore, the total weight is 87,730 shekels. Based on the data, a shekel weighed about 11.4 grams. Therefore, the total weight of gold was 2,200.2 pounds. Are you serious? You know how heavy that is? I calculated the total weight of gold for all the vessels. Okay, that's everything, not just the tabernacle, not just the ark. And I use a thickness of gold overlay of this very thin amount. In actuality, I obtained a total weight of 2,420 pounds, which I felt was close enough to the value stated in the text, considering all the assumptions and approximations that were involved in the calculation. So a cubit, one of those weird measurements the Bible uses, was assumed to be 18 inches. This is fairly reasonable value. However, the figures of the Siloam inscription, 8th century BC, yield a slightly similar value to the cubit. The inscription states that the Siloam tunnel is about 1,200 cubits in length. This is a lot to go through. I'm going to skip this a bit. Okay. Dimensions of the ark were, I'm going to skip to part 5 here. Dimensions of the ark were 2.5 cubits long by 1.5 cubits wide by 1.5 cubits high. Counting the cubit as an equal of 43.2 centimeters, the dimensions of the box are then 108 centimeters by 64.8 centimeters by 64.8 centimeters. If the wood was 1 centimeter thick and the density of the wood was 0.5 gram cubic centimeter, the weight of the wood was about 32 pounds, or 14 kilograms, 14.7 kilograms. He gives his math here. Derby assumed the weight of the wood was 50 pounds. What did this guy assume? This guy assumed 30-something pounds. The capare, the cover of the ark, consisted of 2 connected parts. The flat part that covers the ark and the 2 cherubim that spread their wings over, as described in Exodus 25:17-21, which we just read. Derby assumes that the flat part must be at least 1/16 inch thick, as not to buckle. Basically, what that means is if it's too light, then the lid would just fall off. If it's too heavy, then the rest of the wood would collapse. That's what it means as to not buckle. However, the gold used is not pure gold, as a thinner layer of gold, such as 1/10 of a centimeter, would have sufficient structural strength. The weight of the flat part then is this much kilograms, so 26 pounds. However, Derby gives a value of 52 pounds, basically twice as much. Using a thickness of 0.16 centimeters for the part, okay. The weight of the cherubim cannot be calculated exactly because we do not know their exact size, which is why when I showed you the image of the ark, the angels or the cherubim always look different because once again, all the images are recreations. The real ark is lost apparently to history. I mean, probably in smithereens by now. Or, Indiana Jones has it stored up somewhere. But basically, we don't actually know what the angels look like. So therefore, we can't actually do a measurement. That's what he's talking about here. Derby makes several assumptions and calculates their weight to be 39 pounds, almost 40 pounds. My assumption weight for the cherub is higher, namely 55 pounds. In total, he obtained 92 pounds for the weight of the cabaret. In contrast, I obtained 81 pounds. Wait a minute. If you made the cherubs heavier, but the cabaret lighter, how would the cabaret actually support the weight of two 27-pound angels? But whatever. The gold overlay was applied to both sides and both the inside and outside of the ark. The surface area of the wood, all these dimensions, which basically is a pretty big block of wood. That's what you need to know. It's like pretty thin, but like it's wide, so, and it's pretty high. I'm multiplying this area by 0.02 for the thickness of the overlay of gold, and by the 17.0 for the assumed density of gold. We obtained 20 kilograms or 44 pounds as weight of the gold overlay. So the gold would have. So basically, what this guy, who wrote this anyway? Okay, I'm on page 117. Okay. Elihu Schatz. I think that's how you say that. Anyway. Oh, I went too far. Wait, what? No, I mean. Okay, so this guy, Schatz here, is he's saying that the gold part had to be a lot lighter. That's his main argument of why he's trying to down the weight of gold and the wood. Well, I guess yeah, he's going with smaller, lighter density of wood, because once again, if some calculations put the thing way too high, which would have been pretty hard for 4 guys to carry, and yeah, that makes sense. The gold overlay instead of blah blah blah. Overlay thickness overlay 17 for the assumed density of gold. We obtained 44 pounds as weight of the gold overlay. In contrast, Derby had a weight of 82 pounds for the gold overlay. So basically, I guess Derby was using like twice as much, more or less. The diameter of the carrying poles, as described in Exodus 25:13-15, was assumed to be approximately 2 inches. Therefore, Derby obtained a weight of about 3 pounds for the poles, their gold overlay, and the gold rings. My own calculations for the poles are more detailed. I assumed that they were placed on the shorter sides of the ark, and that they were 4 centimeters in diameter, and 124 centimeters in length, 125 centimeters. This is equivalent to the width of the ark plus 60 centimeters necessary for 2 men to hold the poles on their shoulders. The volume of the poles then is 2 times 1568 cubic centimeters, and their weight is basically 3 pounds. How would 3 pound sticks? That can't be right. 3 pound sticks can carry that much weight. Then again, I don't know. Maybe it could. The surface area of poles is this ridiculous number. Skip down. Hence, the total weight of gold-coated poles. I thought the poles were not covered in gold though. Is 1.57 plus 1.07 equals 2.6 kilograms or 5.7 pounds. The weight of 4 gold rings that hold the carrying poles is almost negligible. I assume that their thickness was about 0.2 centimeters. Their inside diameter was over 4 centimeters, for the sticks to go through. And that they were complete circles, or else the sticks would break because of the jagged shape. Their resultant weight would then is then like basically negligent. Derby's calculations did not include the weight of the decorative gold molding, the crown, all around the top of the ark, as described in Exodus 25:11. My estimate is that the molding was 1 handbreadth, 1/6 of a cubit. My estimate is that the molding was 1 handbreadth wide and 1 centimeter and 0.1 centimeters thick. This thickness provides sufficient structural strength for the molding. Its weight then is this ridiculous number of 9.2 pounds. The total weight obtained of the ark, as stated above, is 83 kilograms, which is the whole point of this essay was how he came to this number, which consists of all these additions. Each of the 4 men carrying the ark would bear a weight of about 46 pounds, which could easily be tolerant on the shoulders for extensive periods of time. This makes sense because there's a part in the Bible where guys straight up, you have to have like 4 guys. I mean, maybe there's like more guys, they just took turns or something. But basically 4 guys at a time had to carry this thing around a city. And these guys had to do it like 7 times. We'll get to that story someday, Lord willing. If necessary, the carrier should use shoulder pads to ease the pressure of the pole. It's kind of a little humorous end sentence. I mean, I can see why they would use it. But apparently... So this guy, Schatz calculated the box to only be 180 something pounds, which that's believable because the other calculation of like 288 pounds. You know how heavy that thing is? You know how heavy 288 pounds is? That's like, I'm trying to think of like what weighs like that much? Like the average NFL player? Well, no, not quite. The average NFL player is like 240. So, like, you imagine trying to carry around, like, something slightly larger than the average NFL player around on, like, the shoulder of 4 guys. I mean, unless all those guys were also NFL players or something, right? But, I mean, we're talking about ancient Israel. I don't think they were all NFL players. That would be funny, though, to think about, but not relevant. I was just really curious about how much the ark would have weighed because, you know, when God tells Moses, like, yeah, you got to make it, like, with these, you know, very precise details, right? And you wonder, like, okay, now I want you guys to carry this thing around. It's like, how heavy is this thing got to be, right? I mean, obviously, these are the kind of things I think about. You probably, like, don't care about those kind of things, but, well, this is my stream. So, I care about these things, so we're going to talk about them. Anyway, I mean, that's as much commentary as we need for chapter 25, right? You know, just wondering about the size of the ark. Just take a quick sip and then we'll move on. Now we have to get to the more really precise calculations. I'm not going to read an essay about how big the tabernacle was, because I'm going to assume that's got all kinds of, like, you know, crazy nuances, right? Of, like, how big the thing was, what kind of cloths did they use, the wood they would have had to use for the tabernacle, and all that. I'm not going to delve into that with that. I just was really curious about the ark, though. Because, I mean, Indiana Jones has it stored somewhere, so the real question is, can we find it at some point? But, gotta raid Area 51 again. Maybe do a successful one, and maybe we'll find it this time. Haha, relevant memes. But, anyway, chapter 26. Make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twisted linen and blue, and purple, and scarlet yarns. I don't know why I did and so many times. With cherubim woven into them by a skilled worker. All the curtains are to be the same size, 28 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. It's a pretty big tent. Join 5 of the curtains together and do the same with the other 5. Make loops of blue material along the edge of the end curtain on one set, and do the same with the end curtain on the other set. Make 50 loops on one curtain and 50 loops on the end curtain of the other set, the loops opposing each other. Then make 50 gold clasps and use them to fasten the curtains together so that the tabernacle is a unit. I mean, you're basically building a giant circus tent, when they have like, the things that divide them, because technically the circus tent has like many parts that can open up, but they always seal some parts off with like the ring things, and they tie ropes. Here they're using the clasp, but you get the point. Think of like a giant circus tent, which is the weirdest parallel I've ever used. It's like the tabernacle, giant circus tent. That's an odd parallel. Anyways, verse 7. Make curtains of goat hair for the tent over the tabernacle, 11 altogether. All 11 curtains are to be the same size. Second yawn of the stream. 30 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. Join 5 of the curtains together into one set, and the other 6 into another set. Fold the 6th curtain double at the front of the tent. Make 50 loops along the edge of the curtain in one set, and also along the edge of the end curtain on the other set. Then make 50 bronze clasps and put them in the loops, and fasten the tent together as a unit. As for the additional length of the tent curtains, the half curtain that is left over is to hang down at the rear of the tabernacle. Tabernacle just means meeting place, by the way. The tent curtain will be a cubit longer on both sides. What is left will hang over the sides of the tabernacle so as to cover it. Make for the tent a covering of ram skins dyed red, and over that a covering of the other durable leather. Make upright the frames of acacia wood for the tabernacle. Each frame is to be 10 cubits long and a cubit and a half wide. This was the thing we were reading the article about, like, these things are massive, and no way they would have carried these on like carts with 4 oxen pulling them. So something's up here, is what the article we were reading earlier was. Make 20 frames for the south side of the tabernacle, and make 40 silver bases to go under them. 2 bases for each frame, 1 under each projection. For the other side, the north side of the tabernacle, make 20 frames, and 40 silver bases, 2 under each frame. Make 6 frames for the far end, that is, the west end of the tabernacle. And make 2 frames for the corners at the far end. At these 2 corners, they must be double from the bottom all the way to the top and fitted into a single ring. Both shall be like that. Once again, keep the circus tent imagery out. Which, if you think about it, a circus tent must have been based on how they built the tabernacle. But more on that later. Verse 24. At these 2 corners, they must be double from the bottom all the way up and fitted into a single ring. And both of them shall be like that. So there will be 8 frames and 16 silver bases, 2 under each frame. Also make crossbars of acacia wood, 5 for the frames on one side of the tabernacle, 5 for those on the other side, and 5 for the frames to the west at the far end of the tabernacle. So 15 in total. The center crossbar is to extend from end to end at the middle of the frames. Overlay the frames with gold and make gold rings to hold the crossbars, and also overlay the crossbars with gold. That probably makes it even more ridiculously heavy. Set up the tabernacle according to the plan shown to you on the mountain. Plans we do not see, but whatever. Make a curtain of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and finely twist linen, with cherubim woven into it by a skilled worker. Hang it with gold hooks on 4 posts of acacia wood, overlaid with gold and standing on 4 silver bases. Hang the curtain from the clasp and place the Ark of the Covenant law behind the curtain. The curtain will separate the holy place from the most holy place, the Holy of Holies, as I mentioned many times. Put the atonement cover on the Ark of the Covenant law in the most holy place. Place the table outside the curtain on the north side of the tabernacle, and put the lampstand opposite it on the south side. For the entrances to the tent, make a curtain of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and finely twist linen, and work of an embroiderer. 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 That's a fun word to say. Embroiderer. Make gold hook. Wow. Make gold hooks for this curtain, and 5 posts of acacia wood, overlaid with gold, and cast 5 bronze bases on them. Okay, I'm gonna get a picture of what the ark would probably look like. Or sorry, what the tabernacle would have looked like. Tabernacle. I like an image of it. I don't like these images all that much, but I suppose it can't be helped. Excuse me, third yawn of the stream. Because, I mean, I've been at this for like over 2 hours now. Whatever, we'll just go with this one. This is actually, Okay, so, the part I just read describes this part. Okay, so before we, so you know what you're looking at. It would be this part. And it's kind of like a circus tent. And then there's, Moses will later receive instruction of how to build a part outside of it, where they, like, you know, the bowl with the blood in it here, and then, like, burnt offerings here, and they do this outside the tent itself, because obviously you're not going to burn this inside the tent, right? I mean, there's no insulation in this thing, but you get the point, right? Anyway, so this part here would be the tabernacle. It's not huge, so maybe the circus tent wasn't the best illustration. I was just thinking of, like, how they, you know, bind up all the parts of the curtains together, and that part kind of felt like a circus tent to me. But this part here, right, it's much more boxy, and so they just put I guess they just, like, the parts with all the wood would have just been like a frame, and they just throw cloth basically on it. I mean, you don't just throw it on top of it. You get what I mean, though, right? But anyway, this part here is the tabernacle itself, and then, like, you have the court of the tabernacle, which is this part here, and then of course, like, you frame it, and then of course, the picture doesn't depict this very well, but this part. Okay, so if you were to do like a compass, this part would be west, this would be north, this would be east, this would be south. Now we know this because the Bible tells us that the west part is the far end. That would be over here, right? So the far end is this part. That's west. Of course, another thing that is undermined and kind of implied, but once again, you have to know some, like, Near East mythology, and not just Near East. Most people groups actually do this. Most people believed that. How do I put it? There's a significance of the east, and there's a reason why the sun rises from the east, quote unquote. Of course, we know that the earth spins that way, in a certain direction, which makes the sun look like. You get the point. The sun doesn't actually rise, okay? Like, the earth spins. We all know that. But, like, you know, in ancient cultures, when they believed that the sun rose from the east, there was a spiritual reason for that, I guess you could say. And so the entrance of the temple, as well as the tabernacle, well, the tabernacle and then later on the temple, the entrance would face east. And so, you know, the way that, you know, let's pretend, kind of the way that the Israelites did, is that let's pretend God lives in this thing, right? He actually doesn't, but that's besides the point. I mean, I guess he rents it, if you will, if you want to be technical. But like let's say God lives in this thing, right? And so when he wakes up in the morning and walks out of the tent, and then he would face east as the sun rises. And everybody's supposed to follow this, right? So God wakes up and he greets the sun. This is why in many ancient cultures they believe that like the east is so important, right? Because when God wakes up, he greets the sun. And that's why the sun comes from the east and moves westward, right? Because the sun goes over, it sees God first, and then it keeps passing over, right? That's the idea. Um, this is why, like in Asian countries where they're more east than other places, like that's why Japan calls itself the land of the rising sun, right? And it's the, you know, where we start our time zones. And so a big part of that is this idea that God, when the sun goes over the earth and God sees the sun, right, and greets it, and that begins the day, right? And since Japan would be first, right, and that's why they call themselves the land of the rising sun. Well, anyway, what's this got to do with this, and why the tabernacle would be facing eastward like this, right? So this would be east over here, right, and west is the far end. Not that there's anything wrong with the west side per se. I mean, I live on the west side. Not Vancouver though. I live on like the west coast, but like in Vancouver, we also have West Side Vancouver, which is like supposedly where all the wealthier people live. Yours truly, not one of them. But anyway, besides the point. So, the west side over here, right? And of course, all these other tents are just like Israelites kind of chilling out, right? They're living here or whatever, right? And so you will get more instructions on how the tabernacle is set up, like, for example, how the outer court is set up, as well as how the tabernacle sits in the middle of the camp. So it's funny that there's no tents over here. They're just lazy. Oh, you actually see it here. Yeah. So there's W, there's E. This is north, right? That's why it has the big arrow, by the way. Well, if they could have just done this better. What the heck? I was like showing you the directions, but it's like, oh, there's a compass right here. The big arrow is north, and north is over here. This is east, by that logic. This is west, and this is south. Once again, this is like ancient mythology thing about how like facing the east side was so important. And the Bible also has this for whatever reason. Like the Bible doesn't actually tell you why this is the case. It's just, I guess, the east is cool, and God likes it. I don't know. No real reason is given. Okay, just work with it. And so, this is how the tabernacle kind of would have looked like. And then, like, I guess one of the annoying things about the tabernacle is that they would have to, like, every, like, few days or weeks or whatever, like, they stayed in one spot, they would have to take this thing down, and they have to move all the pieces. Like, you can't tell me that's not, like, really asinine. This is why, in, like, later times, after, like, Israel established itself as, like, a kingdom, they built an actual temple instead of, like, just having a tent. Because I can see, like, it'd be annoying to move this thing around. Why lie about it? Anyway, that's all I have to say about the tabernacle. Or the tent of meeting. Which is what tabernacle more or less translates to. Alright, we're going to read one more chapter. We read chapter 27. Which will have the courtyard part that we just saw in the tabernacle image I just showed. It has the courtyard. And chapter 26 has, like, I showed you there was a little fire thingy, and then there's like the bowl thingy. And the bowl thingy, there's another piece to it that wasn't shown in the image, and is that there's a lamp there. Which, I mean, it's not, I mean, it would be similar to, like, those lamps with, like, the bowl this way, and then, like, there'd be a fire, right? A pyre! It'd be similar to a pyre. Well, not exactly a pyre, but basically a thing where there'd be a big fire, right, in the middle of the courtyard. Because how else are you going to see everything, right? Especially when it gets darker. But, anyways, chapter 27 will just have the rest of the tabernacle. So, chapter 26 had the tent itself, and then chapter 27 is the court area, the outer part that we saw in the image. Then after chapter 27, we'll end the stream. Anyways, here we go. Chapter 27. Build an altar of acacia wood, 3 cubits high. It is to be square, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. Make a horn at each of the 4 corners, so that the horns of the altar are of one piece. And overlay the altar with bronze. Make all of its utensils of bronze, its pots to remove the ashes, and its shovels, sparkling bowls, meat forks, and fire pans. Alright, what? Meat forks. But there's a reason for that. Make a grating for it, a bronze network, and make a bronze ring at each of the 4 corners of the network. Put it under the ledge of the altar so that it is halfway up the altar. Make poles of acacia wood for the altar and overlay them with bronze. The poles are to be inserted into the rings so that they will be on 2 sides of the altar when it is carried. Make the altar hollow out of boards. It is to be made just as you were shown on the mountain. We don't get to see these plans apparently, but just gotta roll with it. Verse 9. Make a courtyard for the tabernacle. The south side shall be 100 cubits long and have curtains of finely twisted linen, with 20 posts and 20 bronze bases with silver hooks and bands on the posts. The north side shall also be 100 cubits long, and is to have curtains with 20 posts and 20 bronze bases, and with silver hooks and bands on the posts. The west end of the courtyard shall be 50 cubits wide, and have curtains with 10 posts and 10 bases. On the east end, toward the sunrise, the courtyard shall also be 50 cubits wide. Curtains 15 cubits long are to be on one side of the entrance, with 3 posts and 3 bases, and curtains 15 cubits long are to be on the other side, with 3 posts and 3 bases. So for the entrance of the courtyard, provide a curtain 20 cubits long of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely twisted linens, and the work of an embroiderer, with 4 posts and 4 bases. All the posts around the courtyard are to have silver bands and hooks, and bronze bases. The courtyard shall be 100 cubits long and 50 cubits wide, with curtains of finely twisted linen, 5 cubits high, and with bronze bases. All other articles used in the service of the tabernacle, whatever their function, including all the tent pegs for it, and those of the courtyard are to be of bronze. Now command the Israelites to bring you clear oil of pressed olives for the light, so that the lamps may be kept burning. In the tent of meeting, outside the curtain that shields the ark of the covenant law, Aaron and his sons are to keep the lamps burning before the Lord from evening till morning. This is to be the lasting ordinance among the Israelites for the generations to come. Alright, so that's the last part I'm going to read, but I'm going to talk a bit about that image I showed? I'm just going to put the image up again. Just give me a second. Not that. So I can quickly grab the image? Yes, I can. That's what I want. Okay, I'm going to get the image again. Hey, Amer. Welcome. Yeah, it's kind of one of the main things I do. Anyways, so this part was the part I was kind of like, there was the fire thing, and it's supposed to be like, there's a burnt offering thing here. This thing, I thought it was the bowl for like the sacrifice, but I was incorrect. This is the lamp thingy. I'm just confused by the picture, because the lamp thingy is not higher than it should be. But basically, as the Bible mentions, the tent faces eastward. Once again, it's like that whole like ancient world thinking of like God greets the sun, I guess, when he gets up in the morning. I don't know. He just does that, I guess. But and then there's like the fire that's supposed to be like burning all the time, and they're supposed to like put that olive oil in there. I mean, as opposed to other oil. I mean, I guess back then olive oil was as good as it gets. But anyway, so basically the part we just read was like describing this outer part, and these guys are supposed to be like the priests, the sons of Aaron, that are supposed to monitor this thing. Because I mean, the Bible doesn't say what would happen if if they let the fire go out. But I mean, I guess when back in chapter 23, I guess you scared everybody enough by describing the sun as the terror of God. So there's that. S-O-N, sun. Easy to get that confused. Um, but I guess no one would have worried about letting this fire burn, go out. They would have kept it burning all day, basically. Which that you gotta wonder, that's gotta be hella expensive if you did this like every day. And where would they get that much oil? I don't know. It's just one of those like miracles of God things, I guess, where like how would you have enough oil to burn this thing for like hours in and out, day in and day out? Interesting. What a fine image. Yeah. I mean, it's as accurate as they're gonna get it, because once again, like this practice died a long time ago, right? Because like as I mentioned earlier, Amer, um, by the time like well during King David's time they set up the tent, but by King Solomon's time the tent was no longer a thing because they built the temple, right? And so they no longer had a need for this anymore when Solomon built the temple, you know, 500 years after this, more or less. Something like 500 years, give or take. The discrepancy mainly comes from the book of Judges and whether you think the judges overlapped or it was a one after another thing. Um, if the judges overlap, obviously you have a shorter timeline. If the judges were one after another, you would have a longer timeline. But basically, it'd be like 500 years to like 700 years between like God setting up the whole tabernacle system and when Solomon builds the temple during the golden age, I guess during the prime of Israel's history before, down the crapper you go. But basically, chapter 27 describes this part. And then there's I didn't mention this earlier because I guess I didn't notice it. But like yeah, the entry thing is actually made out of the same stuff as the tabernacle itself. The scarlet, purple and blue yarn and the twisted linen. And so the entrance is made this way. And once again, I mean it makes sense. Like you're not supposed to enter, you know, from here or whatever, right? But whatever. So yeah, that's basically the setup of the meeting place. I'm kind of gonna stop the reading here because like I don't want to go into like chapter 28, 29, and part of 30 all talk about stuff that happens in the like in the space, right? So before we were talking about what the space is, the tabernacle and the court, and then the next three chapters talk about like what happens inside, right? Mainly the priest, what they do, what they wear, stuff they use, yada yada yada. I think I'm gonna save that for next stream. But listening to the Bible is relaxing. Yeah, I tend to use audio version more than. I mean, I still do a fair amount of read from the pages, but I mean, it's true with anything, and this is why audiobook in general is just amazing, right? Is that like somewhat the way that I remember this one Bible program actually put it. I mean, obviously the programs talk about like how we deal with the Bible, but this is true about reading in general and listening to books, right? Where there's this kind of more personal connection, if you will, to like the audiobook because, you have the connection of when someone is reading it to you, right? And sure, even though it's mostly one-sided, there's like uh, it feels like you're talking to them, right? You're in conversation, even though once again, with an audiobook, it's mostly one-sided, right? The reader says everything, right? But there's just we as human beings just like to be in that like conversation stance, right? To be in the presence of another person and then just talking, right? I mean, that's why like streaming is as popular as it is. That's why YouTube is as great as it is. That's why videos are as powerful as they are, right? Because videos put that on another level, right? Because then there's an image too, right? But I mean, I totally get the appeal of that too. And so I remember this program about like how, yeah, there's like a certain beauty to like listening to the Bible, right? And so, I mean, the great thing is that like if you have like the Bible app on your phone, you can actually have someone read it to you, and it's the guy like it depends on which version you have because actually different versions of the audio like different versions of the audio Bible, there'll actually be a different guy. Some of them are more interesting than others. I will say that much. Like some of them are more lively than others, but we as people are trying to live peacefully as I'm adding along to this conversation or context. I mean, this is one of those things. Actually, the funny thing is, I was actually kind of poking fun at a Bible prophecy thing. Just go watch earlier in the video, but I'll just kind of reference it. And it was in chapter 23 where like of Exodus, where like there's this prophetic part about how um, it was hard for Israel to grasp the idea of living peacefully because there was such a fear of God, right? And to be fair, when God kind of has his like, he's wearing a essentially like a cloak and a veil, which is supposed to symbolize like a veiling, right? And so I kind of made this like kind of it's kind of a joke, but not really. Like I'm trying to make it funnier than it actually is, but it's actually quite terrifying. Where like when when the angel of the Lord is walking around with this like cloak over him, he kind of looks like the Grim Reaper. And I know some people may think that's kind of heretical, but not at all. The context would be that, unlike in the New Testament, God is without a veil, right? He's stripped, and that's why in crap, which psalm is it? I think it's Psalm. I think it's Psalm. Well, the Isaiah 53 has it as well. There's a psalm that describes it better. It's the part where like, you know, the Bible prophesies that like the Romans would gamble for Jesus's clothes, right? And they do in the book of Matthew. They gamble for the clothes, and they throw dice because what they learned was that the Jesus's cloak was actually of one piece, so they couldn't like tear it up and divide it. So they gambled, and winner took all. And so when Jesus dies on the cross, he's unveiled in that sense. But then in Exodus 23, he's completely veiled, and so he kind of looks like the Grim Reaper because you think of the image of the Grim Reaper, right? He's like got this huge cloak over him. You can't see much of him, right? He's completely covered, and so um, Israel would have been afraid, like the idea of peace, right? And of course, chapter 23 continues that like after describing the angel as like the the power the power to withhold forgiveness, and he carries the name of God, which is as most Bible scholars would agree that obviously we're talking about the Son with this angel. But then later, like a few verses later, he's referred to as like the terror that will move and confuse the enemies of Israel. And so it's just like, right? Uh, Living peacefully is not easy, but once again, this is all the more reason to, um, all the more reason. How do I put this? All the more reason that like it's so important that we understand what Jesus did and why he did it, right? When he died on the cross, the unveiling, if you will, right? And if you read in Matthew, like the end of it, there's that significant moment that when he dies, the veil in the Holy of Holies is like torn in two from top to bottom, right? And so, of course, the problem of explaining it this way is like, I kind of went backwards to explain it, but if you read from like, chronological order, so you start in Exodus, you're supposed to start with the scarier image first, and then you move into like the revealing, if you will. or more accurately, the unveiling. But like, yeah, uh, we as people are trying to live peacefully. As I'm adding along to this conversation, um, I mean, yeah, I mean that's the objective now, right? Because ideally, ideally, um, use that in quotes, I guess you could say. Um, it is through, you know, Christ being our king, if you will. Christ being our king is what will allow us to be more equal. Because I talk about this too when you read like the first part of Exodus 23. It talks about like all these like morality laws about like how to be fair in court and stuff like that. And I mentioned how there was the whole like the Bible addresses the 99% 1% problem, you know, of economic wealth. But at the same time, because that exists, we cannot view anyone being better than anyone else because of economic status, which I mean sounds like a but at the same time, you know, unfortunately, most people don't get that, right? Most of us, most people, we live with like equating you're worth what you have, right? And so, as opposed to now, of course, this is a troubling thing to think about because it's not an easy thing for us as people to do. But one of the things that the Bible tries to encourage us to do is that, like, by putting Jesus as king, right, and Jesus fulfilling the space, I guess you could say, of like authority figure, then since if Jesus fills that space, then no other human being can fill that space. And therefore, that would obligate human beings to be better to each other. I'm gonna move this over. Oh no, that's why I didn't move it over. I'm gonna put it back here. I was gonna put it over like this thing over here. My back. I have a funny image behind here. Maybe. Well, it's on all my other images. I don't know. It was from like Japan, like over a year ago. Wow, over a year ago. See, it's weird how time flies. But I already know well and some reasons on why Jesus sacrificed for us. I mean, there's so many reasons, right? There are so many reasons, and so, but I mean, at the same time, that's the journey is to grasp all those reasons, right? And more importantly, apply it to how we move forward, right? Funny thing with that being said, you know, I talked about this yesterday at the end of my Fire Emblem stream. I talked about how like, you know, the the Christian moments, if you will, in the Blue Lion story, right, where Dimitri has to figure out how to live his life um, instead of holding on to revenge, right, and holding on to the past. And Dimitri has to figure out how to live, you know, for what he believes in and for the future, right. And so it's one of those things that like, of course, I mean, we can never fully grasp, right, because once again, I mean, how our puny mortal brains can comprehend, you know, ultimate salvation and all that stuff, right? Like anyone who thinks they know it all is probably really full of themselves, right? So, I mean, to say we know well some reasons is like, well, that's as good as you're gonna get it, right? So you're on the right track, my guy. Um, more than anything, and I mean, it's not so much the matter of do you just know, but the question is, do you believe in that, right? Because that's what ultimately matters, right? Because how much you know is only going to get you so far. But anyway, that's that tangent in a nutshell. But anyway, I think I'm done the reading part of it. Just leave this. I've ended at the end of chapter 27. So chapter 28 would talk about like the priestly garment, and we talk about like the stuff that happens inside the tabernacle. But I'll say that for next stream because if I read one chapter, I have to read all three of them. But that's going to take me way longer than half an hour. And I am going to end the stream well before 6 o'clock my time. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now. So with that being said, this is going to be the end of the reading segment. I'll just do some housekeeping, stream schedule for the next week, and whatnot. If you have any questions and things like that, throw them in and I'll see if I can get to them. So, housekeeping. First thing that's kind of going to be really different. And if you had watched yesterday's stream, you would know exactly why this is the case. I will actually try and do a stream tomorrow. We'll see if I actually do it. The reason for this is because I want to finish up 3 houses before the start of March. Let me just check the calendar here for a second. Yeah, because next Monday, or not this coming Monday, but the Monday after would be the 1st of March. And in the 1st of March, I actually want to do something very different. I actually want to stream a game I've wanted to play for a while because it's finally coming out. And that would be Bravely Default 2. I will be streaming Bravely Default 2 on this channel when it comes out. Well, a little bit after, because it technically comes out on the Friday, the 26th, but I'm not going to play it on the Friday because, one, it's going to be a reading stream, and secondly, one of the troubles of streaming a game on the day it comes out is like you're competing with like hundreds of other people, right? Because there's going to be so many people like streaming that game, and I'm going to watch some of it too, and it's exciting. I've been looking forward to Bravely Default 2. I really liked Bravely Default, so I'll be streaming that on March 1st. That's the plan, to start streaming it. But of course I got to try and finish 3 houses first, right? And I'm not 100% confident that I could do it in 4 streams, so I might squeeze in an extra one tomorrow. That's kind of what I was getting at. But aside from that, next Thursday is going to be pretty regular. Sorry, did I say next Thursday? Next week is going to be pretty regular. So Monday to Thursday, I'll try and finish up 3 houses. Next Friday, we'll continue reading Exodus from chapter 28 till probably about 32 or something. Up to the golden cow story. The golden calf. All calves are cows, but not all cows are calves. So the golden cow story. So that was kind of how I will approach next week's set of streams. With that being said, this is going to be the end of this stream. I'm going to get ready to prep dinner, so that's a thing, because it's Friday, so we get to do something different. Of course, one of the things that kind of sucks because COVID sucks is that like we used to do this thing where like we would go out on Fridays. Well, the funny thing is that my parents actually started doing this a lot more, like going out on Friday nights. It was mainly because my brother and I went home as often. Because when I worked as a youth pastor, obviously you do youth groups on Fridays, and then like my brother would also like do other stuff on Friday. He used to go out a lot more, and so back then my parents said, "Oh, let's go out," and then like even though like my brother and I are home now on Fridays because I don't do youth groups and he doesn't go out on Fridays, and COVID is also a thing, right? We're like, well, we gotta figure out what to do on Fridays, and so we'll usually do like takeout, so I gotta figure out what that is. And I have to do the ordering for it, so I gotta figure out what we want. You gotta go in the house and be like, all right, guys, what do we have tonight? So, anyway, take care. Yeah. Thanks, Amer, for dropping by. And thanks to the rest of you that will probably watch this on a later video, because that tends to be how these ones go. People tend to watch these ones later and then they cut it up. And I don't blame you. Watch it like you go by chapter kind of thing. Maybe in the future I'll just do like a 1 chapter upload of like a shorter book, because you can't really do that with Exodus, because Exodus is like, it's pretty long. And like Exodus is so rich in content. Like you remember my Genesis ones, like there's no way I can make a video series of like 50 videos, 1 for each. Like the Cain and Abel one was like a whole stream on its own, right? So like there's no way I'd be able to do like a 30-minute video for that one. But anyway, besides the point, this is going to be the end of the stream. I hope you guys enjoyed, more of Exodus. I hope to see you guys in the next set of streams next week. You guys have a great weekend. Is there anything special going on this weekend? No, because last weekend had a lot of stuff, right? Last weekend was like starting of Chinese New Year, or Lunar New Year, and then Valentine's. So, but then like this weekend is not that much. But like, I hope you guys have a great weekend regardless. Hope you guys have a good rest of your night as well. God bless you. Have a good night.